Armed with a warrant, law enforcement officers entered the residence of Gloria Garry, fully prepared to conduct a thorough and meticulous investigation. At first glance, the house appeared neat and well kept. However, as the officers began to explore further, opening doors, venturing down hallways, and eventually descending into the basement, officers were forced to move carefully and deliberately through the cramped spaces, clearing pathways as they went. Blankets were lifted, boxes were moved, and sealed containers were opened, all in the hopes of uncovering something that could advance their investigation. Amid the disorganized chaos, the officers stumbled upon a deeply unsettling discovery. Forensic teams were brought in to confirm the identity, and soon after, their worst fears were confirmed. It was indeed Gloria Garry. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Gloria Garry was born on November 6, 1967, in the heart of Des Moines, Iowa. She was the first child of Thomas and Mary Ann Garry, a middle-class couple known for their strong work ethic and commitment to community. From an early age, Gloria stood out, not with volume or flamboyance, but with quiet determination and an intellect that demanded notice without ever seeking it. She wasn't just bright. She was laser-focused, meticulous, and had a natural affinity for logic and numbers. It came as no surprise to anyone who knew her that she would go on to pursue a career in technology, where those traits could shine. As she grew older, Gloria pursued a degree in computer science at a state university, graduating with honors. She eventually landed a position at Urban Daily, a growing tech and media company, where she specialized in systems analysis and cybersecurity. Her coworkers often said she was the kind of person who brought order to chaos. She wasn't flashy or loud, but you knew things were in capable hands when Gloria was involved. She never missed a deadline, double-checked every line of code, and if she ever took a shortcut, no one could find it. By the age of 49, Gloria remained single, not out of bitterness or regret, but because she had made peace with the life she had chosen. She had a deep reservoir of affection for her extended family, often spending weekends with her aging parents, assisting them with groceries, medications, or simply sharing a meal and catching up on the week. Though she never had children of her own, she was a beloved aunt who remembered every birthday, graduation, and school play. Her nieces and nephews looked up to her not just as family, but as someone who showed that steadiness and kindness could be a life philosophy. Gloria lived by herself in a modest one-story home on the quieter south side of Des Moines. Her house was a reflection of her personality, orderly, clean, and tastefully decorated with soft colors and antique accents. In the warmer months, neighbors would often spot her outside tending to her flowers, especially her prized tulips and irises. She would usually have her elderly terrier Max slowly waddling behind her. Though she lived alone, she was never perceived as lonely. People on her block spoke of her as dependable, gracious, and quietly generous. When someone lost a loved one, Gloria was always there, casserole in hand, ready to listen more than she spoke. Books were Gloria's great escape. She adored detective stories and psychological thrillers, particularly those with intricate plots and strong female protagonists. Her shelves were lined with the works of Agatha Christie, Ruth Rendell, and Tana French. Another of her hobbies was maintaining her small but fascinating collection of antique clocks, each one cleaned, wound, and set with painstaking care. She had little interest in travel or nightlife. Instead, she found joy in the familiar rhythm of her days. Gloria's world was not small out of fear, but because she believed in depth over breadth. But the peaceful rhythm of her life would be disrupted in the most unsettling way. On Tuesday, January 3rd, everything appeared to be normal. Gloria finished her workday at Urban Daily, where she reportedly left just after 5:30 p.m. She picked up dinner from a local pizzeria, something she often did on Tuesdays, and headed home. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. When she failed to show up at work the next morning, her co-workers were surprised. Gloria wasn't just punctual. She was usually early. At first, her absence was brushed off as a possible flu or a rare case of oversleeping. But as the hours passed and she remained unreachable, a faint current of worry began to stir. By January 4, concern had grown. Gloria had plans to meet family for dinner that evening, and when she didn't show up or call, her brother tried reaching her by phone, multiple times. All calls went to voicemail. That was entirely out of character. She had never missed a family event without notifying someone in advance. By the next morning, with still no contact and another missed day of work, her family and co-workers decided it was time to act. A missing persons report was filed with local authorities on January 5th. Officers conducted a welfare check at Gloria's residence, but found no sign of forced entry or disturbance. Her front door was locked. The pizza box from the night she vanished was in the trash. Her car, a red Honda Civic, a vehicle her friends joked could be spotted from a mile away, was gone. Nothing appeared stolen or tampered with. Yet the woman who lived her life with unwavering consistency had vanished without a word, without a trace, and without a clue. Neighbors expressed disbelief. She was the kind of person who followed the rules, who stuck to the plan, one neighbor said. If something happened to Gloria, it had to be serious. Her home showed no sign of hurried departure or distress. Her dog, Max, had been left in the care of a neighbor, but Gloria hadn't mentioned any travel plans. As days passed, her absence transformed from puzzling to deeply disturbing. Her family mobilized immediately. They coordinated social media outreach, created digital flyers, and contacted news outlets for coverage. A Facebook page was launched to gather tips and keep the public informed. Volunteers helped distribute flyers in both Des Moines and surrounding counties. Some even joined in organized searches. A tip line was created for people who preferred anonymity. While the family held out hope, they braced for all possibilities. That faint, fragile glimmer of hope flickered back to life on the afternoon of January 12th, more than a full week after the baffling disappearance of Gloria Garry. What seemed at first like just another dead end transformed into a potentially pivotal development. Around midday, authorities in the quiet, remote town of Pound, Utah, a place largely unknown beyond its sparse population and tranquil scenery, reported the sighting of a red Honda Civic parked near a modest convenience store on the edge of town. It wasn't just any red Civic. The Iowa license plates matched those registered to the vehicle Gloria had last been seen driving before she vanished without a trace. The officers on duty acted swiftly. They approached the car with caution, curious and hopeful that perhaps Gloria herself might be inside or nearby. But by the time they checked the registration and returned to the vehicle, it had disappeared, vanished as mysteriously as Gloria had. Store surveillance footage provided the only clue. A grainy, time-stamped video showing a man climbing into the driver's seat of the car and pulling away. The image quality was poor, distorted by glare and low resolution, but officers noted a few significant details. The man appeared to be wearing dark gloves, or possibly had a dark tattoo running along one of his forearms. His face, unfortunately, was turned away from the camera, and the blurry nature of the footage left much to interpretation. Even so, for investigators and the Garry family, it was something. A spark. A thin but tangible thread to pull on in a case that, until that point, had seemed entirely stalled. From there, the investigation intensified. Local authorities collaborated with their counterparts in Des Moines, where Gloria had been reported missing, to gather surveillance recordings from nearby intersections, gas stations, and local businesses. They scoured hours of footage, hoping to catch another glimpse of the red Civic or the unidentified driver. Who was this man? How had he gotten possession of Gloria's vehicle? Was she with him, or was the car abandoned and later stolen by someone else? And more pressingly than anything else, where was Gloria now? Despite the unanswered questions, one conclusion became increasingly undeniable to everyone involved. Gloria Garry had not simply chosen to disappear. Whatever had happened, it was clear that she had not left of her own free will. When Gloria's family was shown the images extracted from the blurry surveillance tape, they were visibly shaken. Sitting around a kitchen table in Des Moines, they studied the low-resolution frames in silence. The man behind the wheel was a stranger, No familiar features, no hint of recognition, no connection that made any sense. None of the family members had any known ties to Utah, much less to the remote town of Pound, which seemed an improbable place for her car to surface. The location itself only added to the mystery. Why Pound? It was a place few people passed through without purpose. The town wasn't situated on any major routes, and its only claim to fame was a small hiking trail and a family-owned diner that hadn't changed since the 1980s. The appearance of the car there made no logical sense. Unless, of course, someone had intentionally taken it somewhere unlikely, somewhere off-grid, hoping to buy time or avoid attention. With pressure mounting and questions swirling, Des Moines investigators coordinated with Utah authorities to push the still images to the public. Social media channels lit up with the grainy photo of the unknown man. Local and regional news stations broadcast the story. Community boards were updated with digital flyers. Alongside the image, a request. If you recognize this individual or have any information about the whereabouts of Gloria Garry or her red 2003 Honda Civic, please come forward. Tips can be submitted anonymously. Time was not on their side. Every hour felt heavier than the last. Each lead that went nowhere seemed to press harder on the hearts of Gloria's loved ones, and investigators knew the longer the case stretched on, the colder it could become. Then, remarkably, less than 24 hours after the public appeal, a call came in that would jolt the case forward once more. It was the morning of January 13, and a motorist traveling a rural, unpaved stretch of road just outside Pound noticed something peculiar. A red vehicle partially hidden behind a stand of pine trees. The paint looked faded, but what stood out more was the way it was parked, angled, off the shoulder, and barely visible from the main road. The driver felt uneasy. Something wasn't right. They pulled over just long enough to snap a quick photo and call it in as a suspicious vehicle. A nearby patrol unit responded quickly. When the officer arrived on scene, he immediately saw the car tucked beneath low-hanging branches. As he approached, more unusual details emerged. The windows were fogged, suggesting the car had been occupied recently, despite the cold morning air. The once bright red paint had been partially spray-painted with uneven strokes of black, an obvious but rushed effort to alter the vehicle's appearance. It hadn't been done well. In places, the red paint still showed through, and there were visible handprints left in the drying black paint. Even more troubling, the passenger side window had been shattered and then patched over using layers of duct tape and a makeshift plastic covering. This wasn't a quick roadside repair. It was improvised concealment. The vehicle had clearly been tampered with, possibly to delay identification or avoid detection. The officer remained cautious as he radioed in the plate. When dispatch confirmed it belonged to Gloria Garry's missing vehicle, his demeanor shifted. He stepped back, called for backup, and began a slow, deliberate approach toward the driver's side. As he neared the driver's side, the door creaked open. A man, estimated to be in his early 20s, stepped out holding a red plastic gas can. He wore a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, his face neutral but clearly alert. When questioned, the man casually explained that he had run out of gas and had pulled over to rest until someone could bring him fuel. He seemed relaxed at first, but the officer's trained eye picked up several concerning details. The man's hands were streaked with what looked like black spray paint, matching the fresh patches on the car. The officer inquired about the broken window, and the man offered a vague and inconsistent explanation, suggesting it had been an accident during a moment of frustration. His story didn't quite add up, and the inconsistencies only heightened the officer's suspicion. Calmly but firmly, the officer asked the man to step away from the car for a routine check. No weapons or dangerous items were found on the man during the search, but the officer decided it was best to transport him to the local station for further questioning. At the same time, dispatch confirmed that the red Honda Civic was indeed registered to Gloria Garry, the missing woman from Iowa. This revelation immediately shifted the situation from routine to urgent. When questioned at the station, the young man identified himself as Kyle Jeepson, a 26-year-old originally from eastern Iowa. When asked who owned the car, Jeepson claimed it belonged to his aunt. However, When pressed for the woman's full name, he hesitated and failed to provide an answer. Realizing he had been caught in a lie, he quickly changed course and admitted that he had taken the car without permission. He claimed to have found it in a driveway and decided to borrow it, figuring no one would notice right away. Utah authorities swiftly obtained a warrant to search the car. What they discovered inside painted a troubling picture. The back seat and trunk were packed with personal items, not belonging to Gloria, but to a man preparing for extended time on the move. Inside, officers found a tent, multiple sets of men's clothing, a few toothbrushes, a stack of energy bars, rolls of duct tape, a canister of black spray paint, and various camping supplies. Everything indicated that Kyle had been preparing to either live off the grid or avoid detection for as long as possible. Back at the station, Jeepson's behavior grew increasingly erratic. At first, he agreed to speak without legal representation, insisting that he had nothing to hide. But as questions continued, his calm demeanor began to crack. He became visibly anxious, fidgeting in his seat, struggling to maintain eye contact. Detectives later noted that his hands trembled slightly when he was asked about Gloria Garry. A background check soon revealed that Jeepson had an outstanding warrant in Iowa for a previous burglary, a non-violent offense, but still enough to warrant concern. While it initially seemed that Kyle's story might just be one of petty theft and flight from a criminal record, his response to questions about Gloria took the investigation in a much darker direction. When asked directly if he knew where Gloria was, Kyle initially nodded. He said, "She's still in her house." But then he paused, seemed to second-guess himself, and refused to say more. Detectives pressed him to clarify. After a long silence, Kyle finally muttered that Gloria wasn't alive anymore, and that she was still there, in the house. He wouldn't provide further details at that moment, but the implication was clear. Investigators in Utah, realizing the gravity of what had just been said, immediately relayed the information to their counterparts in Iowa. Authorities in Des Moines wasted no time. Armed with this new information, they obtained a warrant and entered Gloria's residence. What they would find in that home would ultimately confirm Jeepson's cryptic confession. But those details were not immediately shared with the public, out of respect for the family and the ongoing investigation. In subsequent interviews, Jeepson explained, somewhat erratically, that he had not originally intended to harm anyone. On the night of January 3rd, he claimed he had been aimlessly wandering around a neighborhood in Des Moines. Cold, hungry, and desperate, he stumbled upon what he thought was an unoccupied house. Seeing the lights off and no car in the driveway, he allegedly broke in through a side window and hid inside. According to his statement, Kyle waited in the shadows as Gloria returned home later that evening carrying a pizza box. What happened next was described by Jeepson in a strange, disconnected tone. He told detectives that in those moments, it felt like he was watching himself from a distance, as though he wasn't fully in control of what was happening. He described the experience as watching a movie where you're in it, but you can't stop anything. Investigators listened carefully, noting the blend of evasion, distortion, and passive language. While he offered a partial account, many questions remained unanswered. What exactly happened that night? Was this premeditated? Or did Jeepson's story about a chance encounter conceal something more deliberate? Kyle Jeepson claimed that everything about the days following the incident felt strangely disconnected from reality. When investigators later questioned him about his state of mind, he responded in vague, abstract terms, saying it felt like everything was happening through a screen and that he didn't fully feel present. According to his own words, he experienced no remorse, not because he lacked understanding, but because it all seemed surreal, like watching someone else's story unfold. Instead of fleeing immediately after the event, Kyle did something that left investigators deeply unsettled. He remained in Gloria Garry's home. For a number of days, he stayed there as though nothing had changed. He reportedly took long showers, browsed channels on the television, and even logged onto social media. Detectives later uncovered that he had used Gloria's Wi-Fi connection to send a few messages and post photos to Snapchat. The nature of those images remains undisclosed, but at least 2 of his contacts later told authorities that the messages seemed off, raising red flags that something wasn't quite right. Despite their unease, no one contacted police at the time. Kyle, meanwhile, helped himself to $200 in cash he found tucked away in a drawer and eventually decided to leave town. He took Gloria's red Honda Civic, a vehicle that would later become key to his capture, and drove across several state lines, making brief stops at rest areas in small towns, sleeping in the car or in remote campsites. It appeared to investigators that, even while on the run, Kyle didn't fully acknowledge the magnitude of what he had done. His behavior painted a portrait of someone either dangerously disconnected from reality or pretending to be. Following his arrest in Utah, Kyle Jeepson was placed in a regional detention center while awaiting extradition to Iowa. Law enforcement officials began the slow, meticulous process of building their case. But one haunting question loomed over everything. If Gloria Garry had truly passed away, as Kyle claimed, where was she? Her family, who had first reported her missing, had visited her home multiple times in those early days. They had walked through the front rooms, checked the kitchen, glanced into the hallway and living room, but they hadn't found anything to suggest foul play. Even after the police joined the investigation, early walkthroughs of the property had yielded no signs of a crime. However, those searches had been limited. Without a proper search warrant, officers were legally restricted from opening locked doors or rummaging through storage areas like the attic, basement, or tightly packed closets. They could only observe what was visible on the surface. When Kyle told investigators that Gloria was still in the house, many were stunned. How could so many people, including her family and trained officers, have missed something so critical? Why hadn't they seen any trace of what had occurred? The statement from Kyle prompted authorities to act swiftly. A full search warrant was requested and granted without delay, giving detectives the authority to perform a complete examination of the home, including every nook and cranny. By this time, 9 days had passed since Gloria Garry's sudden disappearance. Her loved ones had grown increasingly desperate, caught between fading hope and rising dread. With warrant in hand, law enforcement officers re-entered Gloria's home, prepared for a thorough investigation. Inside, they faced an unexpected obstacle. It became clear that Gloria had quietly struggled with a condition many had overlooked: hoarding disorder. While her home appeared orderly on the surface, behind closed doors and down in the basement, items had accumulated over the years. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, newspapers and magazines dating back decades, and various belongings stored without clear organization. The clutter made the search labor-intensive. Officers moved methodically, clearing paths through narrow walkways of stored items, shining flashlights into dim corners, lifting blankets, and opening sealed containers. The scene was overwhelming, but they pressed on. Eventually, among the disarray, officers made a grim discovery. Forensic teams were brought in to confirm the identity, and soon after, their worst fears were confirmed. It was indeed Gloria Garry. Out of respect for the family and to protect the dignity of the deceased, the exact location within the home was not made public. Police emphasized that the condition of the home, combined with legal limitations in earlier visits, had contributed to the delay in finding her. But the public, understandably, was shaken. The idea that someone could remain in their own home, unnoticed for days, was deeply unsettling. Residents of Des Moines were left in a state of collective disbelief. The peaceful community where Gloria lived had always been viewed as safe, a place where neighbors watched out for one another and trouble rarely made headlines. Now that illusion had been shattered. Further investigation into Kyle Jeepson's past revealed that this incident wasn't his first encounter with the law, nor his first intrusion into someone's home. Just 5 days before Gloria was reported missing, on the evening of December 29, 2016, Kyle had broken into another home, this time belonging to a woman named Icy Taylor. Ms. Taylor lived alone on Hullum Avenue, not far from Gloria's neighborhood. She had returned home from work at around 8:30 p.m. and walked into her kitchen, only to find Kyle there. He had helped himself to food from her refrigerator and a glass of wine from her counter. Though terrified, Ms. Taylor kept her composure. She raised her voice, demanded that the intruder leave immediately, and surprisingly, Kyle complied. He dropped what he was holding and bolted from the home without confrontation. Shaken but unharmed, Taylor rushed to her window and caught a glimpse of the retreating figure. She quickly realized she recognized him. He was the son of her former neighbor. She wasted no time contacting the police to report the incident. While nothing had been stolen, Taylor emphasized how disturbing and unpredictable the encounter had been. Her concerns were taken seriously, and a warrant was issued for Jeepson's arrest. However, by the time officers arrived to follow up, he had already disappeared. For Taylor and her family, the incident was a wake-up call. She had previously felt safe in her home, but that confidence was gone. Not long after, she made the difficult decision to move out of Des Moines entirely, saying she no longer felt secure in the community she had once loved. When she later learned of Gloria Garry's fate, she realized with chilling clarity just how serious the threat had been. Her own experience had been a close call, closer than she'd ever imagined. Kyle Jeepson was eventually charged with first-degree murder, in addition to burglary and vehicle theft. Given the severity of the charges and his history of evading law enforcement, the judge set his bail at $1 million in cash. A figure meant to reflect the seriousness of the case and the risk he posed to the public. But the story did not come to a close with the arrest, nor even with the verdict. In truth, it evolved into a deeply layered tragedy, one that rippled across two families and shook an entire community. On one side stood the family of Gloria Garry, people mourning the loss of a beloved daughter, sister, and aunt, whose quiet life had ended in a way no one could have imagined. On the other side stood the parents of Kyle Jeepson, struggling to come to terms with the realization that their own son was behind a crime that had horrified the town. For them, it was a reality too jarring to reconcile. When the news of Kyle's actions reached his parents, they were devastated. They were described as decent, hard-working people who had tried their best to raise their son with structure and values. His father withdrew from public life entirely. Friends of the family said the couple had noticed some changes in Kyle's behavior over the past year, but nothing that could have predicted what would ultimately unfold. As investigators dug into Kyle's past, more details emerged. Kyle had been working at a local pub just 10 minutes from Gloria's house. For a time, he had a reputation as a dependable employee. He showed up early, covered shifts for others, and made light conversation with customers. Coworkers described him as a bit reserved, but always respectful and seemingly kind. However, after he was let go from the pub, reasons not publicly detailed, something seemed to shift. Those close to him noted that he became withdrawn, harder to reach, and more unpredictable. He stopped returning messages. Some friends assumed he had simply taken a job elsewhere, while others assumed he had moved out of town. No one, not even his own family, suspected that Kyle had retreated into something far darker than isolation. One moment, in retrospect, stood out as particularly eerie. After Gloria went missing, her family and friends worked tirelessly to spread awareness. They handed out flyers with her photo at grocery stores, schools, and local businesses. One of the stops they made was the very pub where Kyle had once worked. Without hesitation, a staff member taped Gloria's missing persons flyer to a prominent spot in the front window. At the time, it was simply one more act of solidarity. Later, that very act became a haunting reminder. The man responsible had once worked behind that counter. The same window that held Gloria's image had once reflected the face of the one who took her life. When Kyle's identity as the suspect was revealed, the staff at the pub were stunned. Former co-workers expressed disbelief. "He was just this quiet guy," one of them said. "The idea that someone like that was capable of this, it just doesn't make sense." The shock extended beyond those who knew Kyle. The entire city of Des Moines and surrounding communities watched in disbelief as the details of the case unfolded. Legal proceedings began quietly but built in intensity as more facts came to light. The courtroom filled with a mixture of media, family members, and residents following the case. The trial concluded in September 2017, bringing a measure of legal closure to a case that had unsettled so many. Kyle Jeepson, at the time just 22 years old, ultimately agreed to a plea deal in order to avoid the possibility of a harsher sentence at trial. His legal team attempted to argue for leniency, pointing to his mental state and suggesting that his actions stemmed from an internal crisis that had gone unchecked. They referenced his previous break-in at I.C. Taylor's home as evidence of a downward spiral. However, the court remained resolute. The memory of Gloria Garry, by all accounts a kind, respectful, and generous woman, loomed over every moment of the trial. Her family spoke of her love for books, her quiet routines, and the countless lives she had touched. Her elderly father, unable to bear the weight of the trial, declined to attend the proceedings. He told reporters he could not sit in the same room as the man responsible for ending his daughter's life. "It would destroy me," he said in a quiet interview outside his home. "I want to remember her for who she was." For his part, Jeepson attempted to explain himself. He described a feeling of emotional collapse in the weeks leading up to the crime. He claimed that he had been overwhelmed by what he referred to as internal demons, a phrase he repeated several times during sentencing. He expressed regret, but his words were met with silence from the courtroom. Even his tears during his final statement were met with skepticism. The judge, who had reviewed the results of a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, pointed out that Jeepson had been found fully competent to stand trial. There was no diagnosis of any mental illness or condition that would absolve him of full responsibility. In the end, the judge handed down a stern and unequivocal sentence. Kyle Jeepson received 50 years in prison for his actions against Gloria Garry. An additional 10 years were added for the earlier burglary at the home of I.C. Taylor. The court mandated that these sentences be served consecutively, meaning Kyle Jeepson would need to serve at least 35 years before he would be eligible to request parole. For many in the public, the sentence brought a sense of justice. But for others, lingering questions remained, especially one that continued to puzzle investigators, journalists, and residents alike. How could Gloria have remained undiscovered in her own home for 9 full days, even after multiple searches? While police declined to release all details, citing the family's right to privacy, some insight came from interviews conducted with Gloria's relatives in the weeks following the trial. It was revealed that Gloria had quietly battled hoarding tendencies in recent years. Her small home, filled wall to wall with books, papers, unopened packages, and storage bins, had become increasingly difficult to navigate. Her love of mystery novels had turned into a growing obsession. She collected them faster than she could read them, stacking them on counters, staircases, even on the floor. The home, in effect, became a labyrinth. During the early days of her disappearance, family members had entered to check on her, but only in the main rooms, never realizing that critical areas might be obscured. They had assumed, wrongly, that if she were there, they would have seen signs. But in a house full of carefully balanced stacks and hidden corners, the truth remained out of view. In the end, Gloria Garry's story became more than just a case file or a headline. It served as a reminder of how the quietest lives can leave the deepest echoes. Her kindness, her care for family, and her simple love of stories had shaped the people around her. She hadn't wanted much from the world, just peace, routine, and the company of her books. And in the wake of her loss, the community was left reflecting not only on what had happened, but on everything that had gone unnoticed until it was too late.